Okay, so last week, for those who asked what we did last week we didn't have one. I was doing an anti-Semitism training, and it feels very apropos to the class that we're talking about anti-Semitism. There's so many thoughts, there's so many things that I've been reading, and welcome, Alice. Is that another Rochester person? Rochester rocks. Rochester rocks, right? Rochester rocks here. We got 4 Rochester. That's amazing. The anti-Semitism training that I did last week. So Lance asked me to share a little bit. It's a group called the Shema Project, I think it is, maybe from the words Shema. I didn't bring my sources with me. I mean, what I took away from there were 2 people, one from New Jersey and one from Chicago, who were flown in. It was at the UJA offices, and the UJA has actually given them a stipend or whatever it's called, money, in order to work on this project. First of all, it was 2 hours long. There were people in the room who were Jews and many people who were not Jews. There were people from different color background. Do you say that? There were people who were Black. There were people who were not Black. There were all sorts of backgrounds. There were people from different faiths. And some of them had no idea about anti-Semitism or didn't know a lot of the material. For me, the first part felt like things that I knew, but I'd never seen it collated so beautifully. So the first part was all presented on a screen, huge screen, was putting together the anti-Semitism trope of where it began, like where the first documented cases are. And I don't think it means in the Torah, the first documented cases, but documented cases that you could see out of history, and put it together really well. For example, they had a map of Europe from, let's just say 1900 to 2000. I don't actually remember what the dates were. It was hard to take in everything. Hi, Robert, you're sideways. And they had dots about how many anti-Semitic incidents there were, meaning pogroms. Now, they had to explain the word pogrom. Somebody here not know the word? Or does everybody here know the word? Everybody knows the word. So a pogrom was not even familiar to some people in the room. And there was everything from pogroms to, expulsion to anti-Semitic incidents. And when they superimposed all the decades from, let's say, if I don't remember if it was hundreds of years or tens of years, I actually don't remember. It might have been hundreds of years, like over the last 1,000 years. Europe was just covered with red dots, and that was very powerful. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of anti-Semitic incidents. They even pointed out, for example, that on Disney movies, the villain most often is identified by, anybody know?
Big nose.
Nose. Who said that? Debbie.
Me.
Yeah, a big nose, a hook nose, which is indicative of the way Jews, or I don't know, everybody look at my nose. How's my profile? How's my profile? Do I have a big nose? So that was always, right, this whole thing about Marjorie Morningstar or her friend, right? They did I don't know if you remember that story by a book by Herman Wouk about having a nose job. So people would look less Jewish. Thank you, Elmer, for getting the area ready. And I like, that was just fascinating. I mean, I kind of remember even in there's another one that's not Disney with the Minions, I think. And it also, I remember now that he really does have like this big hook nose. So in insidious ways, it has permeated so many parts of our culture or other people's culture. By the way, Vivian has been encouraging me to read about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And I will do it, and maybe we'll do part of it in this class once. But I actually saw a short video of a man who comes from Muslim background who is an exchange student in high school. And he ended up, I guess, coming to America. I don't remember where he was from. I didn't get all the details. He was telling how he had always been taught that Jews were horrible, that Jews just wanted to kill everybody, that Jews had, fangs or horns, or they were just terrible, terrible people. And he said that somebody had given him the book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, ding. And he said, they told him, this is the book that Jews don't want you to read. So Vivian, I assume this all makes sense to you, resonates with you. As if Jews wrote, and it said things like the first chapter was Jews want to take over the world. Chapter 2, Jews want to control all the money in the world. And he believed it. He said this was a very big influence on him. And then when he ended up, just happened to be that they placed him with the Jewish family, and he immediately asked to be moved to another family. And the school said, okay, but you'll have to wait a couple of days till we find somebody. You have to resubmit your application. And he said he doesn't know how, but the mother of the place he was staying was not insulted that he asked to be moved. But over the course of those days, he found out that the Jews were not these horrible people. And he had a whole different read of what Jews are. And today he's a peace activist. So I just wanted to tell you, Vivian, how like that already gave me a window into the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And am I speaking too quickly for people? Or am I okay? We're okay? Okay. But this just, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The protocols of the Elders of Zion. So if somebody gives you this book and says, this is the information you need to know about Jews. Jews are trying to hide this book. And somebody just fabricated it and made it up. But then
I think it's from Russia, wasn't it? The Russians.
Vivian, was it Russian? Vivian.
He was a Russian, yeah. Russian wrote it, and he pretended to be a rabbi. Wrote it like he was a rabbi. He was actually just a Russian who hated the Jews, and wrote it in a way to make Jews very hateful.
Right. So that's false news, and false news can easily be accepted. Once false news gets out and one person likes it and accepts it, another, how do you rescind that? How do you roll that back?
It was written in Russian and written in their language.
That's right. Accessible.
Yeah. And they read it, and it was written by a rabbi. And
as if by a rabbi who masqueraded as a rabbi. Purim, big for Purim.
And
masqueraded. Yep. Okay, so moving on with thank you for this presentation. So first, they just explained how anti-Semitism is really, really old and how it has crept in so many ways that we don't even know. And this was an eye-opener for many people there who had never really understood what anti-Semitism is. But it was also, even for me who knew all the material per se, it was put together in a very cogent way. Scary, upsetting, but still cogent. Also, the people who presented it were wonderful and lovely and presented in a way that felt easy to follow and were warm. And, you know, when you talk about anti-Semitism, it can feel so hard. So it was helpful to have a warm, friendly atmosphere in the room. That's just my own personal take on what happened there. The next part they spoke about was, I don't remember everything, but it was allyship. And we had a whole 15, 20 minute, even longer possibly. What is allyship? And then we spoke about how that can happen, allyship. So I'd love to, if I ask this group, what does allyship look like in general? And then what does it look like for Jews? I'm not sure there's such a difference. Any thoughts? I'd love to just go around, and if people want to say one word or one sentence, I'd be happy to hear that.
Connecting with other groups.
Connecting with other groups, allyship, right? Groups who are not your natural groups. Great. What else? Great. Thank you, Karen. Debbie.
The seeing other people as people made in the image of God, and acknowledging that, and not just saying, oh, they are, they're this,
they're that, right.
I want to just one other second. I'm reading this book. It's a very long book. It's called The Lost, and it's by this guy Daniel Mendelsohn, but he spoke in Rochester. And one of the things that just, even though I knew there were a lot of expulsions, he went down the list of times and times that Jews were expelled different countries, and it was just went on and on. And when he was speaking, I said, oh, this is enough. And then, it clicked that, oh, this is something we really should know in our background. Anyway, just in back of
100%. Yes. I'm telling you, those slides were so powerful. Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. Ruby, you had your hand up.
Yeah, with allyship, I think of protection or a cause. When you have allyship, very often there's reasoning behind it. There's a reason for it that this occurred.
Wait, can you say more about that?
Or for a cause, because you're
what? Can you give an example?
Well, you're allied for a cause if there's a war. To protect yourselves or to protect others. It could be for a purpose. You're allied because you want to do something that I would hope is right.
The what is right? Say it again.
Well, I would hope that the purpose of the allyship is for something positive. but it could be for something negative.
Correct, correct. So here we are talking about allies. You're right. And let's talk about allyship within the context of anti-Semitism, what allyship could look like. You're not wrong, Ruby. I'm just asking people here for that, but I hear you. Allyship can also be with people who are against Jews, right? It could be that as well, if we're talking about Jewish people. But I guess what they were trying to do there, because there were non-Jews and Jews or people of color, there were people like me who were rabbis, there were leaders, they wanted to bring up this idea in this training about what it could look like, how the simplest thing, like a text, but we'll get to that, can feel good. So let me just park what I was going to say, and we'll continue going around the room. Yes, Milton.
Yes, the image that comes to my mind always is Heschel, who walked across with Martin Luther King for the March on Selma.
So given what Ruby said, what do you think was the cause, the reason, the source, the purpose, whatever, of that kind of allyship? What do you think?
Well, I think that Rabbi Herschel did it out of the most pure emotions. He fully believed.
He fully believed.
He just
He
wanted
couldn't
to form
not.
allies.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
If you get to form an ally, doesn't necessarily mean you like the ally or you agree with the position. Here,
But
Heschel, we're next. If they get the black people, they'll get the Jewish people.
So that, I think that's what I was understanding from you, Ruby. Sometimes allyship is because of shared values. Sometimes it's because I want to do good in the world, but it can also be, in addition, perhaps to that, will be you're coming out against this minority. Well, I'm a minority as well. And if I don't stand with you, you're not going to stand with me. I don't know if it's so overt always in our minds that that's the reason we're doing it, but you feel like kinship with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Protection.
Okay. Yeah. And that creates protection. And by the way, there's an added advantage in the end. You actually create connections. You might do it for protection, but in the end, you end up finding out that people are people. And underneath it all, we're people. I mean, hopefully good people. Yes, Vivian.
Yeah.
And 1 second. Hello, Thea, and hello, Alice. Yeah.
What happened at that time when Heschel and most of the Jewish people were for civil rights for the blacks and supported that whole thing, but it was never reciprocated. The blacks never tried to do anything to help the Jews. Never. It
Never?
was
No, don't say the word never.
I don't think we can say never, Vivian.
reciprocated in any.
Vivian, time out. I don't think we can use the word never.
No.
That's not fair, because it could have been on a small scale. It could have been.
Let me say that in American history, in the books, it would not mention that the blacks were supportive of the Jews and angry if anyone did anything against the Jews. And I know that from the books because I taught it. I used to teach American history, and the book
So you
wrote that, and the children did not learn that, and they learned the Jews supported civil rights and worked for the blacks, but it was not, according to the books, it was not reciprocated.
May I say something?
Yeah, who says that?
Me, Judy, me.
Judy. Judy. Okay, I have to find you. Yes, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. I think in recent history, Vivian, there are movements among the Black people of wanting to recognize our shared history. Like we were slaves, and Martin Luther King had a great connection to Jewish people about the promised land. I see the promised land. So there's
Right. So Judy, I want to say for sure there have been initiatives. I think what Vivian was pointing out is that it may not have been recorded and taught. Anyway, do you want to add to this something else?
Yeah, I wanted to add 2 more points. First of all, the word Russia and Russian is kind of very cute that that's the same thing. Russia and
in Hebrew, it's Russia.
oh, okay, you're right. Okay.
I really don't want to do that. That feels really hard to make all of the Russian people evil.
No. Okay, then one other point. I know recently I've been watching the son of the founder of Hamas. He actually did a big teshuva. He hates his father. He is now actually working for the IDF in the intelligence.
Yeah,
Very interesting to see. So how,
right.
you know,
So it's a
both-
bright point of light that somebody can see the truth, just like the story that I told. Thank
Right.
you. Somebody else want to add something before we move on?
I was gonna,
I like the,
Debbie and then Lance, and then
Yeah.
we'll move on.
this is quickly, but I have a girlfriend who's not Jewish, and she apparently in Rochester there was a forum about anti-Semitism, and so she puts on her front lights. She has blue lights apparently on her front porch to acknowledge that she is anti-Semitism.
Oh,
And I think
nice.
so. There's a way that she identifies with that. It's very sweet. It's very nice.
That is very nice. Lance, you want to add?
how many of you in here were beaten up because you were Jewish?
I was threatened. I
Beaten.
was not beat. I was
I was-
definitely
I
threatened.
was called a dirty Jew.
I was called a dirty Jew and physically beaten. I grew up in a small town called Mount Carmel, which is predominantly Catholic. There are only
Hey, weren't we
25
talking
Jewish-
about allyship though?
I'm talking about anti-Semitism.
Okay, we're going to hold that story because we're going to get to that. Right now, we're talking about allyship. So just to hold that story because we're going to get to that as well. I mean,
Okay.
it sounds like a hard story, but I want to talk about allyship because I was asked to share about what happened at the training. So some of the things that came up are things like people work in places, and they said when October 7th happened, some people reached out with a text message or an email saying, how are you doing? I'm thinking of you. It sounds awful. And some people ignored it like it just didn't happen. So one feels like allyship and one feels like I'm being ignored and the hurt I'm feeling doesn't mean anything to anybody. Another way of showing allyship is physically showing up or being what we call an upstander as opposed to a bystander. Upstander is somebody who's willing to say something, to physically stand. Now it's hard because you could be against a mob or against, a lot of people, but that would be a way. We had a whole list of them, trying to figure out where they were, but there were many like that about showing allyship, about reaching out, about making connections. And I want to tell you, this actually influenced me. I went, the district attorney, who is a Black woman, Letitia something or other of the Bronx, I think it's the Bronx. She has started a Black Jewish coalition between leaders of faith. I went to one of the evenings. It was good. We didn't get a chance to really connect enough to do things together. And even though I had a conflict for this coming Monday night, they reached out a few times and I decided this is more important because we have to make the connections and see each other as people. Oh, I know one of the things that I spoke about on the allyship is holding multiple narratives. There are many narratives to hold. It could be that I believe one narrative, but there is also another narrative. Let me give you an example, and I don't want to discuss this politically. I just want to give narratives. What's happening in Israel, and there are bombs, and it's awful, every part, and being displaced and people killed, all of that, 100%. But there is another narrative that coexists, that there are people in Gaza, and I don't know how many, because I have no idea if I can rely on the numbers. I just don't know. I'm not saying they're wrong. I just don't know, that are innocent. And again, I don't know which ones are innocent and which ones ally with Hamas. But there are some who are hungry and thirsty, and there are some. Now, I'm not even saying it's necessarily Israel's fault. It could be Hamas. No, Hamas is the one who started all that. But I'm just holding a narrative that there are people being killed, or there are people going hungry who can't access food. So we're talking about more than one narrative. And when you have allyship, you need to hold more than one narrative. Okay, you need to have at least be open to that. Does that make sense to people, how allyship? Because if you're not holding more than one, then it's not allyship, it's just people who are with you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
Being willing to hear another story, to hear it, and to say there is some validity, maybe not. I mean, I can't imagine I would ever sit down with a person from Hamas. I even the thought of it, right? I don't think I would come out alive if I was in a room with somebody like that. But there are people, many people in the middle. So that is what the training was about. I hope that we can continue with it, maybe go to a second stage. Now, we were talking about anti-Semitism in the Megillah, and we basically have been learning the Megillah pretty much pasuk by pasuk. I don't know if we'll finish by the end of this year in June. I will be delighted if we'll end up continuing, because to me, it's wonderful to learn the Megillah. I guess if I thought of it, I would have started in September, but sadly, it was October 7th, and the anti-Semitism that reared its ugly head and poked up, that's what caused me to think about doing this class. So I want to tell you, first of all, before we start Perek Gimel, the 3rd chapter, which may be next time or the follow, I don't know. I want to take a pause and spend some time talking about anti-Semitism in general. Where is the first case? Where do we see it? What is the root of it? What perhaps we might do about it or not? And then bringing in Haman. Remember, Haman appears in which chapter? Anybody remember? It's not a trick question. Which chapter of Megillat Esther does Haman appear in? Anybody who finds the Megillah knows it. He's in the 3rd chapter. It's okay. I wasn't testing you. I was just saying. He appears in the 3rd chapter. So once we have been introduced to Achashverosh, and we've been introduced to Vashti, we've been introduced to Mordechai and Esther. We're going to be introduced to them more today. Once all that happens and we've set the scene for Esther being in the palace, which is what happens, and before Haman appears on the scene, Haman is the main protagonist that's showing us anti-Semitism, even though through Midrashim, we have been learning about Achashverosh showing anti-Semitism and Vashti. I wanted to bring to you also another lens, so many lenses that we could read Megillat Esther. Like, we literally could start back at the beginning once we finish and read the whole thing through a lens of historical context, which I touched a little bit on, but I don't think I would go back through and do it all again that way. But I did want to bring you another lens of Rabbeni Lau. People here familiar with his name, Rabbeni Lau?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. He's really wonderful, modern Orthodox, or Datzilumi, whatever you want to call it, rabbi in Israel. He's a great nephew, I believe, of Rav Yisrael Meir Lau, who was the chief rabbi, a wonderful person. And there is greatness, rabbinic leadership greatness that seems to flow somewhere through this family. Rav Lau himself, the one who was chief rabbi, he was the descendant of rabbis for many generations. And his son-in-law also, not son-in-law, his great nephew also has this leadership capability. Rav Beni Lau also started the 929 project, for those who are familiar. There are 929 chapters in the whole Tanakh, and it's about reading a chapter a day. I want you to know that I was doing it every single day until October 7th. And since then, I've had a very hard time getting back to it, whether I can't focus or I have too many other things to do. And I hope to climb back on the 929 wagon and learn that. Rav Beni Lau is a historian, in addition to being a leader and a rabbi. And he has written books about our sages and about many others. And I have a Megillat Esther. I didn't bring it today. I'll bring it next time. Megillat Esther with the Perush in Hebrew. I don't know if it also is in English. And he speaks about the whole Megillat Esther from a historical perspective that places Achashverosh and the other players in a different lens. What was so fascinating for me, and I'm going to bring you some of it, I can't bring all of it, we'll just spend the next 10 years if we look at every single Perush there is on Megillat Esther, but he sees Mordechai and Esther as completely assimilated Jews. That is how he sees them. He bases it on verses from Yechezkel, who was living at the time. He bases it on other quotes. And he bases it, and again, I'm not going to go back and learn all of chapter 1 and 2 through that lens. But what was so interesting for me is that whether you say there was a reason for them to hate the Jews because they were different, or whether you say that there wasn't a reason for them to hate, or I don't know if that's a reason to hate the Jews, but there is a fear, there's something called xenophobia, which is fear of somebody being different. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Just fear of the different, right? So it could be general xenophobia, or is there something actually called anti-Semitism, which is very specific and irrational? Is it rational? Is it irrational? But if you read it through the different lenses, whether the Jews were completely assimilated, or whether they were like some, as we've read about Mordechai, Ish Yehudi, that as soon as you saw him, you saw that he was a Yehudi. He looked different. He had payas. I don't know. He acted differently. His clothing was different. You have to leave, Vivian?
Yes.
No worries. You can watch it online afterwards, but thank you for coming till now and adding what you added. Understood.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. You'll come next week. You can watch it online if you want. Okay. It just seems to me that through any lens that we read it, whether it's comedic, is that how you pronounce it? Comedy, as Lance pointed out, and as Ted, who's not here this week, and their caricatures, whatever you look at it, no matter what, almost like no matter what the Jews do, there's always anti-Semitism. Like it seems to in some way not matter what we do. Anti-Semitism still flows through. How many Jews in America are completely assimilated? Now, even when they're assimilated, they still may feel a connection to Israel, and they still, Jews who just people finding out that they're Jews or that they believe that Israel has the right to exist are completely derailed, are completely taken down and not given a chance to speak. We've seen this and heard about it on college campuses and in other places. So here's a question for the forum. I'm not saying we have to answer it, but a question is, does it help to assimilate? Does it make a difference when you look like the people around you and you act? Remember there were the anusim, we don't call them Aranos. What do we call them? I forgot what we call them today.
Conversos.
Conversos. Thank you, Debbie. The conversos, those who converted outwardly, but not inwardly. And everywhere people went, Muslim countries, Christian countries, other countries, everywhere the Jews were, as you pointed out, so many expulsions, so much hatred, seems like baseless hatred just on the fact that we're Jews, whether it's because we look different. So we're going to spend some time on those sources next. Before we start Perek Gimel, I want to spend some time on what anti-Semitism is, what it has been through the ages, and then come back to Haman, who showed anti-Semitism, it seems, from the first moment that he appeared on the scene. And one of them, just to give you a hint, is, let's say it was because Mordechai didn't bow down to him, right? It says, Lo kara v'lo ishtachaveh. He didn't bow down to Haman. Is that a reason to annihilate his whole nation? When you see a person who looks like X, therefore the whole nation is bad, terrible, evil, have to be annihilated, have to be persecuted, have to be destroyed? Where does that come from? Okay, so food for thought. Now, Rabbeinu Lau says like this. He proves, again, I don't want to take you through everything. Just trust me on this, that this is what he proves, that there were three types of Jews living in Persia. One of them, 1 minute. Here we go. And we're going to go back to the sources. We'll read a few psukim today. We did learn last time the Ish Yehudi, the reason it says Ish Yehudi, Haya b'Shushana Bira, that this is Mordechai, that he looked like a Yehudi immediately. You could read it a different way. You could read it that a Jewish man, Ish Yehudi, you couldn't tell that he was a Yehudi, so the Megillah has to tell us because it wasn't obvious. Do you see how you can read the opposite from the same two words? Again, you could read it as Ish Yehudi. It was obvious when you saw him that he was a Yehudi. Or you can read it as the reason that the Megillah had to tell us hello, Felice, is because it wasn't obvious that he was a Yehudi. And somebody here pointed out that Mordechai, I can't remember who it was it Moshe? He's not here today. Levison, that Mordechai is not a Jewish name. So again, this is not about people here having non-Jewish names and using them. I look around and I see that most people use their secular names. And that's fine. Like, I don't have an issue with that. It's not a judgment call here. But how interesting is it that the Megillah, which is about saving the Jews, would use his non-Jewish name, unless that was the name he went by? Is that how he was called up to the Torah? Now, today, people are called Mordechai, or in Israel, Moti, very often. That's the short abbreviated form. So today it's become Bert, has become a Hebrew or Jewish name, as well as Esther. Esther also is for Ashtar. So 1 second, I'll get back to that. Yes, Bert.
Yeah. With regard to whether or not it was obviously Jewish, the Megillah says that, that that when Haman refused, notes that, that when, that that Mordecai didn't bow down to him, his friends tell him, oh, he gid lohem asher hu Yehudi. So if it was obvious that he was Jewish, then nobody would have to have somebody explain it to him that he's Jewish.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes, Debbie.
So sort of a funny thing about being Jewish or not, my sister, one of my sisters, changes her sheets every year at, when it's the secular New Year. I mean, she changes them all the time, but she always makes
not
it's in
just
the middle
once
of
a
the
year.
week. That's right. It's in the middle of the week. So she, for whatever reason, she told this to a friend of hers, and the friend said to her later, "Oh, we changed our sheets and washed our hair just like the Jewish people do." So it was something that was totally not Jewish, but because a Jewish person did it, it became the Jewish thing. And
Wait, can you explain that again? I thought we were talking like for Shabbat that people
no,
did it.
no. She just on the secular New Year, the kids would wash their hair and she changed the sheets starting anew, even if it was in the middle of the weekend. She usually changed her sheets on Sunday. But so she said this to a friend, and the friend took it and understood it as, oh, this is something that Jewish people do.
Wow.
Another
Oh, I see
Yeah.
what you're saying.
so
Oh,
Yes.
my
she
other
said,
sister
like, as if all Jewish
bicycled to
one
people do
work.
it.
second, Felice,
Yeah.
Felice, we can't hear two people at once.
Oh,
One second.
okay.
Yes. Debbie.
Another situation was my sister rode her bike to work. She was working at the YWCA in Rochester. And somebody said, "Oh, you rode your book, or I rode my bike just like Jewish people do."
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
it was like what you did. It didn't matter whether it was Jewish or not, but because they understood you as being Jewish, they put that in. That must be what Jewish people do. That must be being Jewish. Sort of a very weird thing.
Yeah.
That-
Felice, thank you, Debbie. Did you want to add something to that, Felice?
Yeah, I just want to say, it's like, what you said, Mordecai isn't a Jewish name, but we
Right.
don't know, what was his, do you know his real name? I mean, what was
No,
what
that's
was
what
his,
I said. We don't see his real name.
but I'm saying Mordecai nowadays, you hear the name Mordecai.
That's what
you
I
say,
said,
okay,
right? That today we have adopted it. Look, Moshe also, it's what Bat Paro gave him his name, Mishitihu Mehamayim, that I drew him out of the water.
right.
But
Mhm.
Moshe may or may not have been. So all of that, you're right. And Esther also. Esther is okay. So one second. Yeah.
But even, Bracha also, just a quick second. Also, all the Shvatim, when they were born, it says why they were named Ruvain or Shimon, why their mothers gave them that name. Like Ruvain, that God to that I wasn't so.
Right. No, that's true. You're right. In which case, Moshe would sound like it is Jewish because it's
right.
Hebrew, 100%.
Okay.
But okay, great. Thank you for adding that. That's helpful. Okay.
One point.
One point.
Another
Yes.
Yeah.
One point, Debbie was talking about the lady saying that that's the Jewish thing to do. That reminds me of the fact that the onus is on us as Jews that we should always act in the best way, so that when people say, "Oh,
right.
Jews," so that they'll think of the Jewish people in a more favorable light.
And that's the idea of being Or LaGoyim, a light to nations. The only problem is that, Judy, I think people can interpret as they wish to interpret.
Of course, but
I want to add a funny story about.
I have. Okay.
What, Felice, you want to add?
Yeah, I was just. I was just thinking. What Bill thought. One of the things that Dillam said was Am Yisrael Levadat Lishko Levagayim Lo Yischachshav. One of the things that Dillam was saying.
Yeah.
That Am Yisrael Levadat Yishkon. I think it is Levagayim Lo Yischachshav. And that was that Am Yisrael, the Israelites are different, and they should dwell amongst the Goyim.
Right.
That's from Bamidbar.
Mm-hmm.
Balak, Pashas Balak.
Yep. Thank you.
You're
what
welcome.
I wanted to say, based on what Debbie said, the thing about Jews riding bicycles or Jews. So listen to how things can be misinterpreted. My grandmother, Alea Shalom, she was told, for whatever reason, my mother, who's a nurse, said to her, there's something called medicine toxicity, where you have too much of the medicine, so you want to take a break once a week and take your medicine, depending on which medicine. I'm not talking about insulin, I'm not talking about, but depending on the medicine. Don't take my advice as medical advice. So she or they told my grandmother, don't take it on Shabbat. Don't take it on Shabbos, because if you don't take it on Shabbos, that'll give you that once a week. You always know when Shabbat is, right? So don't take your medicine on Shabbat. So what they discovered was that she wasn't taking it on Yontif either. Because she didn't get that it was about once a week. She thought it was about, you don't take it on Shabbos, you don't take it on Yontif. So I thought that was just a cute, and it's true. I mean, that was a real story. I don't know if it made a difference, except that there were so many days of Yontif, like on Pesach and Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah before, she wasn't taking it for a very long time during those times. Okay, so that's about misunderstanding. All right, so what I was saying about Rav Beni Lau is that he said there were three groups of Jews. One were nationalistic, who went back to Eretz Yisrael to build the temple based on Koresh allowing them to go back. One was religious, waiting for God to send them a sign. They didn't believe that Koresh, a Persian king, was the sign that they're allowed to go back. By the way, that happens today as well. That's why the Neturei Karta and other very, very, very extreme Jews don't believe in the state of Israel. They think it's wrong and sadly speak out against us. And people, people from the other side hang on to their words. They see there were Jews here who hate Jews or whatever. So obviously the Jews shouldn't live in Israel. And they base it on that. Al Naharot Bavel, Sham Yashavnu Gam Bachinu. We were on the waters of Babylon. We were sitting and crying because we were still waiting to go back to Israel. And then there was a third group who didn't go to Israel, which we know not such a large group went back, even though Koresh said they could. They were assimilated. And according to Rav Beni Lau, maybe they didn't really remember Eretz Yisrael wasn't meaningful to them, maybe not even God. And in fact, the students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in Masechet Megillah, and the Gemara say to him, שאלו תלמידיו של רבי שמעון בר יוחאי, מפני מה נתחייבו שונאיהן של ישראל שבאותו הדור כליה? For what reason were the enemies of the Jewish people, which is actually the Jewish people, but it's a euphemism, saying they were their own worst enemies, when exhibiting behavior that's not in their own best interest, that's the euphemism, why were they deserving of kilaya? Why were they deserving that Achashverosh should put out a decree, or Haman and Achashverosh should put out a decree that they should be killed? So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai amar lehem, imru atem, you say the answer. That was kind of cute that the teacher says them. They said, because they partook of the feast of that wicked one, Achashverosh, and probably meaning that they ate from forbidden foods and drank from non-kosher wines, maybe other behavior as well. So that was just one lens that Rav Beni Lau is bringing to show that there were so many assimilated Jews, and based on that, he said Mordechai and Esther were also part of assimilated Jews. Now, I want to tell you something. If you read it for that lens, and in the end, they're the ones who saved the Jews. That reminds me of people nowadays who felt far away and today are looking for connection to Judaism because feeling threatened, or feeling like Israel might not stand a chance, or is being threatened, or caring so much about brethren in Israel and finding more united front among Jews, even those who were far away. And then he goes on to say Mordechai is like Mordach, head of the pantheon of the Persian gods. Esther is like Ashtar, the goddess that lights the Persian heavens with a godly light. Just a moment. And that explains why it is that, where is that? Oh, it's further on, which we'll get to. Why is it that Mordechai was hanging around the king's gates? Why was he there? Why would anybody let him do that? Certainly, if you look like a Jew, that would be unusual. And secondly, we have a midrash that he was head of the Sanhedrin, the high court. What is somebody who's a rabbi and doing halachic decisions? What's he doing hanging around the king's palace? Why does he even care about political intrigue? That's a very unusual place for somebody like that to hang out. Now, we learn it through a different lens, like, wow, it's so amazing. He knew all the languages. By the way, one of the reasons that he knew all those languages, this was kind of cool, is because everybody know what I'm talking about, that he knew 70 languages? That was a midrash? No. Okay, so you know what? We'll wait till we get there. Never mind. Now, I think we did not start chapter 2. Is that correct?
We did.
We did start it. That's what I couldn't remember. where did we get to? Because I wrote, that's what I couldn't make, I wasn't sure because it was 2 weeks. I think we got to verse 6. Does that sound right to people?
We definitely had, there's a certain Jew in Shushan. We did that, I think.
Did we do Asher Hagla Mirushalayim? Did we do that? Verse 6, Im Hagola Asher Hoglita Im Yechonia Melech Yehuda
No, I
Asher
don't
Hagla
think so.
Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. So everybody look at verse 6 in chapter 2.
Okay.
This is about Mordechai. So this is a way for people to read that he was very connected to being Jewish, and he in fact was a Zionist and loved Eretz Yisrael and wanted to go back there. And how did they learn that? Because in verse 6, 3 times it says the word Hogla, that he was exiled. Why does it say it 3 times? You didn't have to say it 3 times, but rather that 3 different times he tried to go back and make Aliyah. Each time the Gra, the Vilna Gaon said, 3 times he was expelled or whatever, he was part of whoever it was who was kicking the Jews out. But this is something we read in the tune of Eicha, which is the way I just read it. Okay, everybody good? We're on verse 7 now. Verse 7, yes. Yeah. Verse 7. Vayhi omenet hadasa. So he was omen, a mishpacha omenet is a foster home in Israel. That's a foster home. Et hadasa. So actually, who asked? Felice, you asked what Mordechai's name is? We don't know Mordechai's name, but guess what? We know Esther's Hebrew name. And yet Esther has been accepted as a Jewish name nowadays. People are not just called Hadassah or Hadass. That's very common for modern. More than Hadassah, people called Hadass. That's more modern Israeli. He Esther. Why does it mention both of them? Who has an idea? Why does it say both Hadassah and Esther? Why do we need to know both of her names?
I guess her public name was Esther. Maybe
Right.
at home it was
Nice.
Hadassah.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. That was her. And that was the name that she went by outside. And that's the name that she was introduced to the king. That's the name when they were gathering up the maidens. Bat Dodo. So Bat Dodo means the daughter of his uncle, meaning his cousin. Wait, Bat Dodo. Yep, the daughter of his uncle. Why did he foster? Ken la ava'em. She doesn't have parents. They were killed when she was a baby, I understand, according to that. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to foster her. Beautiful in form, handsome in appearance. All right, it says here. So he took her as a daughter. He raised her. They're actually first cousins. We hear very often that he's her uncle, but actually that would have to be Dodo, and it says Bat Dodo. You see how false rumors get started? That she's the daughter of his uncle, so she's cousin, but because it says Dod in there, people, right? Is that true to people here? Remember? That
Yeah, always, yeah.
Right, always her uncle. I don't think that's true, not if you read the text. I mean, it doesn't make a big difference in how we remember, but it's just showing us how easy it is for us to be led astray by a story that somebody says or a word, and then we just think that's true, that's fact. But then you go back in and you see that that's actually not true. Now here's the interesting thing. Have you heard also that there's a midrash that she was really his wife? No. So there is a midrash. There's a famous statement of our sages that says, Ishto kiveto. His wife is like his home. So there are those who read, Rashi reads bat, 1 second. Lekacha Mordechai lo levat, that Mordechai took her as a daughter, actually is bait, like his home, meaning maybe they were cousins to begin with, but that eventually they got married. Yeah, Debbie.
Yeah, I think I know when they do things like that. It says here, it says Bat his cousin, and they make it into his wife. It just makes it so much more complicated.
Right. Why do that? You're saying.
That interpretation makes it unusual and weird. And then is she committing adultery with the Hashver? And I don't know why. That's what, like, when they do that, I don't know why. It just seems weird to me.
That is a really good question. By the way, I do want to tell you, 1 second. Yeah, I don't see that here. Literally homestead of Louis. So they, oh, wait 1 second. Banim, Yofi, Takshitim. All right, they have an answer here, but you're right, but it wouldn't answer what you're asking, Debbie. So I think that's a really good question and it requires research. But I do want to say that there is an understanding why was she called Hadassah? Hadass are green, Hadassim, they're myrtle leaves. That she actually, that's where they get it from, that she was of greenish complexion. However, God endowed her with an ingratiating kindness that made her appear beautiful in everybody's eyes. Now, again, that may not be, I see. Consecrated the 3 minutes elect Yofi, however, the Megillah that she did possession, but okay, so you're right. I don't need to go into more of that because it doesn't add anything to our story. Okay, moving on to verse 8. Felice, were you raising your hand? You're sideways now. You're muted, Felice. Felice, you're muted. Felice, you're muted. You're muted. Felice, you're talking, but you're muted. Okay, sorry. Vayihi, you went off camera now, but you're still muted. Maybe you can get unmuted. Vayihi bishama devar hamelech v'dato, v'kavetz narot rabot el Shushan habira. Let me read it in English. It came to pass when the king's order and his decree. Remember what was his decree?
That Vashti coming, no, right?
No, this decree, I think this decree is about that every fair maiden must be brought.
Oh, it's after Vashti.
Right, we're after
Sorry.
Vashti. To
Yeah.
Shushan habira, to Haggai. So it's interesting. It says Vatilakach Esther, that Esther was taken. Vatilakach Esther. So it's a passive form of how she came, which shows her reluctance about going. Vatilakach. I just think it's meaningful to show the passivity of women in general, and certainly here. I just think that's very powerful. It doesn't have to do with anti-Semitism.
Well, no, but it also, I mean, excuse me, it's she was very passive, but when she later on in the Megillah, when she needs not to be passive, she's able to, which is
Correct.
remarkable. That
So
she
you should
goes
know,
to the
one of the things we said in one of the previous classes was, Batilbash Esther Malchut. It doesn't say that she donned royal garments. It just says she donned royalty. And there's a beautiful explanation of that she not only donned the garments of royalty, but she herself donned royalty and became royal, became a queen, and was able to take agency, which is a beautiful part of the whole Megillah. Somebody who has no agency was able to. So thank you, Debbie, for pointing that out. And we'll get to that. Yes, Bert.
I don't really want to get into this, but that I think that she was an exceedingly reluctant participant
Yep.
in the saving of the Jews. She says, I haven't been called in 30 days. Why should I go see the king? What's going to happen to me?
That's a lot.
And then Mordechai gives her Musar, and says to her, if you don't do this, don't think that don't think that the Jews are not going to survive, but you and your family will die, so she was exceedingly reluctant, to do this.
Now, I can understand that. I think that's an interesting point. Somebody pointed out that they are reluctant heroes, and that would make sense also if you think of them as assimilated, but either way, it might make sense. I think it's really hard to be the hero when your life is on the line, or when you've never spoken up, or you've never spoken in public, or whatever the reason is, and yet they were thrust into the limelight, but she did rise to the occasion. So we can talk about how she rose to the occasion when we get there.
Question.
Yeah.
A point about the word vatilakach.
Yes.
In the word vatilakach is lekach is a lesson. Isn't lekach tov ki lekach tov natati lahem? Isn't lekach, doesn't that mean a lesson?
Interesting. I mean, it is, except I'm
I
not disagreeing with you, and that's interesting, except that it's a form of the verb. So it's like, but that would be, Lamed Kufchet in general, that's the shoresh, the root, not Bati Lakach. That would be true for anything, Lakachti. But so not 100%, but maybe
Fetch.
Lekach, which I don't remember is the exact translation. Maybe you take it, and maybe that's why it's similar. I don't think it's specifically about Bati Lakach, because you could take something bad, you could take something good. Not sure you could do that. I mean, I love that you connect things with the shoresh. It's a little hard for me to put this one on. I want to continue just Pasuk 9. I know it's 12 o'clock, and we'll stop there. But so what happens? There's a beauty pageant, and then it stops at Esther. Remember that. That's our last thought. It stops at Esther. I just want to say that there is a beautiful midrash, but there's a chesed of Fanav, that she obtained favor before. Oh no, I'm sorry. This isn't the Hashverosh. This is Haggai. Apologies. He hastened so he gave her all the lotions, everything that she wanted. The midrash says she didn't ask for anything, but he gave it to her because he wanted her to have it. She didn't ask for anything. Does that make a difference to us, by the way? Why do we care about that midrash? Why do we care that that she didn't ask for any creams or lotions?
She was modest, very tznuah.
Or reluctant. Like, I don't need to look more beautiful. I mean, that's the way I see it.
Yeah,
Yes,
I feel better about it that she's reluctant because it seems so un-Jewish that she would promote herself to be in a beauty contest, and her cousin would also, who's her, the parent, would bring her to this place. So I feel better that she's reluctant.
nice. Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate that. We all feel maybe a little better. Thank you. There's a beautiful midrash on it, Sheva HaNe'arot, that she was given Hari'uyot Latet La Mi Beit HaMelech. She got 7 maidens. Now, whether everybody got 7 maidens or not, it wasn't clear to me, or she asked, but it's a beautiful idea that the reason, and this I really love, she doesn't have a calendar, she doesn't have a GPS or a phone, she doesn't have TV, but if she has 7 maidens, and everyone comes on one day of the week, she'll always know when Shabbat is, which I thought was just really, 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 really beautiful idea. And also these 7 maidens, they may not know that the other maidens come the other days. So they may think, oh, the fact that she's not writing on Shabbat, they might think, oh, she never writes. Because if the same one came every Shabbat, then they don't know. That girl, she doesn't know what Esther does the other 6 days of the week. Or the one who comes on Friday says, okay, so Fridays, she washes her sheets. I'm just throwing that out. Maybe she thinks that on Monday, she also gets her sheets washed, or every day it gets washed. If you go to hotels, every day they wash the sheets, of course, but if you're there now, you have the option not to do it. But I'm just saying, if you have a different person every day, you're able to live your life differently. And that way she could theoretically keep Shabbat. Even if they were assimilated, it still is possible that she kept Shabbat. We're up to verse 10, which we're going to start next time. I don't know if we'll stop next class or the following class. I really want to teach a lot about what anti-Semitism is, but I still think we'll wait. Yeah, we might wait until we start chapter 3, because that's what I really want to do. We're going to learn probably one, maybe we'll start next time, depending on how far we get. We're going to take some time to talk about anti-Semitism throughout the ages. What is anti-Semitism? What is the causes? What is the root? To see what modern day thinkers think about it. Like Rabbi Sachs, Erica Brown. I know we've brought them in already, but I want to bring in some more. And then we will be armed to go into chapter 3 and read what is Haman's source? What is the source for his hatred? And I've already given a few tidbits about that. Oh, all right, my friends.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Anybody else want to say something? No, we're good. All right. Have a wonderful day, my friends. Take good care.
Thank
Thanks for being on. Bye-bye.
Okay.